For 100 years, the church's calendar ends on this solemnity of Jesus Christ, the King of the universe. This is it. Next Sunday, we reset the clock and the calendar. We start all over again with the first Sunday of Advent and the countdown to Christmas. Well, why then? If Jesus is the King of the universe, why is he being put to the end? And the last thing that we talk about in the liturgical year. You're reminded of what Revelation says of Jesus. The last book in the New Testament said that Jesus Christ is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. He makes all things new. Very much in keeping with St. Paul's beautiful hymn of praise of the sovereignty and the supremacy of Jesus Christ that we heard in the second reading, the beginning of Paul's letter to the Colossians, when he told us that Jesus is God and he creates all things. All things were created for him and through him, and that he holds all things together. Jesus is the source and the summit, just like the Eucharist that we were about to receive. And that is why the church has placed him at the end of the church year, because the end is also the beginning, and he is the Alpha and the Omega. But as I said, this is the 100th year of this solemnity. It was instituted 100 years ago in 1925 by Pope Pius XI. But why was that? Why did he feel with so many other feast days in the church calendar, was there something missing that needed to be corrected? Well, we have to look at the world in Europe at that time. The Great War had ended, the bloodiest conflict humanity had ever seen up until that point. But in the 1920s, there was not peace spreading across Europe or the world. The winds of war were blowing once more in the form of the rise of totalitarian states and regimes in countries across Europe and across the world. To Pius XI's east, they were facing communism in the newly formed Soviet Union. Right there in Italy was Mussolini, fascism in Spain, fascism under Franco. Hitler rose to power in Germany, the rise of the Nazi Socialist Party. There was revolution all across Europe, all across the world, and these totalitarian regimes, without fail, consistently persecuted people in the church. They wanted people to turn away from relying on God and the church to provide them hope and to meet their needs, and instead rely completely on the state and the government to solve your problems. And when the government tells you, don't believe in God, we'll solve your problems, the government becomes the problem. And Pius XI understood that. And he knew that there were Catholics behind enemy lines in all these countries suffering under communism and socialism and fascism and Nazism, and he needed them to understand that no matter what earthly rulers may try to make them do, no matter what earthly rulers try to prevent them from doing, Jesus Christ rules over the universe. That includes every planet, every star, every galaxy, every country. And that was to give them hope. Just like Jesus' kingship gave hope to an oppressed people throughout the Roman Empire 2,000 years ago, when he promised them placement in a kingdom, a world without end, where they would always be free and never be oppressed. So too the kingship of Jesus Christ reminds those of us who still feel oppressed by the rules of earthly rulers who try to make us do certain things or prevent us from doing certain other things, that we are made for more, we are marked for majesty. And so on this feast of Jesus' kingship, all of us have to make an account of our stewardship. Have I been a loyal subject of my king? Am I a loyal citizen of his kingdom? Do I allow Jesus Christ to reign in me and over me and through me, and to allow that kingship and his supremacy and sovereignty to affect what I do, what I think about, what I say, and more importantly, what I choose not to do and not to think about and not to say? He is a merciful king who doesn't just pardon sinners, but gives his life for his subjects. But on this feast of the kingship of Jesus Christ, we are reminded that just as a century ago, Pius XI feared a world that was hostile to the gospel, the world is more hostile to the gospel today than it was then in 1925, and is certainly more hostile today than it was even in Jesus' time. As we see in the news, in Nigeria, those 300 Catholic school students that are simply gone. No one knows where they've been taken. They were kidnapped from their beds and disappeared in the dark of night for no other reason than they were in a Catholic school. What is this world coming to? But on this feast of the kingship of Jesus Christ, we're going to look at the example of just one man who, when given the choice, decided to disobey an earthly king. He would not take the knee. He would bow only before the King of Kings. And for our example today, we're going to talk about a Jesuit priest who was born in Mexico at the end of the 19th century. He is the blessed, beatified, not canonized yet, just like Blessed Solanus Casey, one miracle shy of being a canonized saint of the Catholic Church. We have Blessed Father Miguel Agustin Pro. Miguel was born in Guadalupe, in Zacatecas, in Mexico in 1891. As a young man, he felt the call to the priesthood, but the Mexico he was growing up in would not welcome that vocation. It was the beginning of the 20th century, and a new president rose to power in Mexico. His name, Plutarco Calles. He hated Catholics. He had no use for the Catholic Church, and he was determined to use all the power at his disposal in order to crush it. And thus it was that in order for young Miguel to follow his vocation to the priesthood, he had to flee his own country. He was for a time here in the United States, in California. Then the Jesuits sent him to Nicaragua, and then to Spain, and then to Belgium. And eventually in 1925, he was ordained a priest, but he didn't want to serve in Nicaragua or Spain or Belgium. He wanted to serve his native people back to Mexico. He asked the Jesuits, reassign me to Mexico City, and they did, and he arrived there in 1926. But it was nothing like he remembered it. All the cathedrals and churches, Catholic schools, convents, all those Catholic institutions were boarded up. They were closed. The Catholic community was forced underground because it was a crime to openly and publicly profess and practice the Catholic faith. Father Miguel had to pray about this. How am I going to serve my flock? The priests and religious could no longer wear the robes representing their religious office. They had to go underground. They had to move in the night. They had to work in secret, much like the early Christian community of those first decades and centuries after Jesus' death and resurrection. But Father Miguel proved adept at adapting. He was going to find a way to baptize their children, to perform marriages, to bury their dead, to anoint their sick, to hear their confessions, and to give them hope in this desperate time. And so Father Miguel became a master of disguise. During the 2 years that he was back in Mexico City prior to his death at the age of 36, he at times would be dressed as a beggar, as a chauffeur, as a businessman, as a married man, all this so that he could elude the police and the government to find the Catholics and minister to their spiritual and sacramental needs. He went so far as to taking the uniform of a policeman. He didn't steal it. He's a priest. He borrowed it. He put on that policeman's uniform for one purpose, because several Catholic men had been thrown in the jail, arrested for daring to pray in public. And so Father Miguel put on that policeman's uniform and risked his own life to get into that jail to pray with them and to give them Holy Communion. Everything was going well, except for the fact that even though he wore so many disguises, news of his ministry was adding fame and acclaim, and that put him on the radar of even the president and his army and the police and the government. They were all looking for this priest, shape-shifting into many different uniforms and disguises to minister to the flock. And then President Calles felt that opportunity fell into his lap. In November of 1927, a bomb exploded, a car bomb, attempting to kill an important military general who had been the president of Mexico before President Calles. And when they looked at the remains of the car in which the bomb had been placed, they realized, or so they thought, that it belonged to Miguel's family, to his brother, more importantly. So the president found the opportunity to arrest all of them, the brothers and even Father Miguel. And they were going to make a public spectacle of them to prove to anyone else that was thinking to try to poke the bear and rise up against this oppressive government, don't even think about it. When the man who had bought the car for Miguel's brother, when the man who had planted the bomb in the car saw that even Father Miguel had been arrested, he turned himself in. He confessed to the crime, but the police would not let Father Miguel go because they were going to make an example of him. And so they invited the media and several important and rich people to his execution, hoping to put the whole country on notice. You better watch out. And these pictures were widely reported in the newspapers all across Mexico 98 years ago, because it was on this date that year, November the 23rd, 1927, that Father Miguel Pro was going to be shot by the firing squad for crimes he did not commit. You can look these up on Google Images because you won't be able to see these, so small for such a big church. But here is Father Miguel when he was brought to the wall. And you can see the wall is riddled with the bullets of other Catholics who had already died against it. And Father Miguel is kneeling on the ground, not because he finally decided to give in and bow before President Calles or those police. Instead, he asked to pray. That was his last request. They offered him a blindfold, and he refused it. He said, "Let me see." He prayed for those who were about to end his life. And then just before the shots rang out, here is Father Miguel choosing to stand against the wall. Others needed to be shackled to it. All he did was put up his arms like Jesus and let them know he was ready to go. And the last words that he spoke, as dozens of rifles were aimed at his 36-year-old body, the last words Father Miguel said, and they echo now, 98 years later, "Vivo Cristo Rey, long live Christ the King." And then it was over. President Calles thought by putting these pictures and papers all around the country that the Catholics would give up, that they had realized this is a hopeless cause. We're all going to die. Let's just give in and do whatever they tell us. But instead, the exact opposite happened. The pictures of this brave priest praying for his persecutors and saying, "Long live Christ the King," reawakened a dying faith in that persecuted country. And it rose up like never before, to the point where there are more people that go to see the image of Our Lady Guadalupe in Mexico City each year than go to St. Peter's in the Vatican. And that's because the blood of martyrs has always been the seed of Christians. And so Father Miguel had a choice. He could have stayed outside of his country. He could have played it safe. And even when he was arrested, he could have denied his faith in order to spare his life. But instead, it was his faith that enabled him to see those bullets flying at him and give his allegiance to the King of Kings and the Prince of Peace. Vivo Cristo Rey.